What's happening? This is the Tap In podcast. We are live inside of the Tap In studio, man. I got to read this ad real quick. So for those who don't know, ERC has a program, or the actual IRS has a program where you can actually get some money back. If you have a small business, you can actually get some money back for keeping your business up and running through the pandemic. And I'm using a company called Lendio to do my ERC, is employee retention credit. So if you want to get your money, use Lendio. The description is in the link below. Use Lendio to do all your taxes to make sure that you qualify. You can get up to $26,000 per employee, okay? So make sure you contact Lendio to help you get through the paperwork, because it is some difficult paperwork when you're dealing with the IRS. Make sure you use them to get your stuff set up, and just go see if you qualify, okay? And let's get ready. We're going to start the show. I got a special guest in the building. I met this young lady probably 3 weeks ago, and she just started telling me her story, and I was just amazed, and I was just like, you got to come on my show and tell my audience. Miss Christina, how you doing, ma'am?
I'm doing great, man.
Good, man. Thank you for coming on. Thank you for tapping in with us. It is my pleasure to have you on the show.
Man, well, thank you for having me, man.
Yeah. So, Christina, where are you originally from?
I am originally I grew up in Garland, Texas.
Okay.
Until maybe about the age of 12, 13 years old. And from there, the situations that happened in my life led me to Pleasant Grove. So the majority of my life was in Pleasant Grove. That's basically like my Egypt, of where God brought me out of.
Okay. And so how long were you in Garland?
Till I was like about 11, 12 years old, around there.
Okay. So pretty much a nice little part of your life in the beginning.
Yeah.
Okay. And you said situations in Garland brought you out of there. What happened?
Yeah.
Can you talk about it?
Yeah, I can talk about it. Well, first of all, I just like to give the Lord, my Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ, glory for saving me, delivering me, and setting me free. Before I do anything, I always give him the glory, because had it not been for God and for his mercy and his grace, I wouldn't even be sitting here being able to have an opportunity to even talk about my life, to talk about where he's brought me out of, or what he's doing in my life and what he has done in my life. But up until that point, when I was younger, my mom was actually a prostitute and a drug addict. My mom was caught up in that lifestyle. My dad was very young when he had us. It was me, my brother, and sister at the time. So there was three of us. And it was a very dysfunctional relationship between my dad and my mom at that time. And due to the, infidelities of my father and my mother at the same time, of course, they ended up separating. And there was a time that me, my brother, and sister did live with my mother. And it was just in a very abusive background. My grandmother was constantly, how could you say, she constantly let me know that she hated me every single day. Every day that I woke up and came out of that room, I would have to know that I was going to have to face her face and look her in the eyes and hear her on a daily tell me just how much she hated me, and how much I disgusted her. And it wasn't until the point that when my grandfather would have to step in from time to time and tell her, that's enough, let up off of her, because my mom was always gone. She was always in the streets. She was always about that life, caught up in the lifestyle. It was so bad to the point that I didn't even know her as mother. I just knew her by her first name.
Really?
So because she had left us all the time, I never addressed her as mom, mother, mom, nothing. I always just addressed her by her first name basis. And my dad, for something inside of me, I longed for my dad, because when my dad did have us around, he treated us very different. He treated us with somewhat of some compassion, some type of affection. And when I would go with him, I didn't have to be an adult. I didn't have to take care of my brother, didn't have to take care of my sister. But it came to a point where it got very dysfunctional with my dad and my mom, to the point that she finally abandoned us. And I think what the straw that broke the camel's back was, one day we were visiting my dad for a weekend, and I think it would be forever etched in my mind. And a lot of times people think, oh, you can't remember that far back. Yes, you can. Mm-hmm. There's certain memories that are in your heart and in your mind that are forever etched. Now, you don't have to stay in that pain, but it's in those memories that propel you to your future and to your purpose. And in that, I remember the day that my dad was dropping us off. I remember his car. I remember where he was parked on the curb, and I remember just standing there, was playing around. We're getting dropped off, but I was just so excited because we had just came from my dad's house, and I just felt free. But then it was like going right back to a dungeon. You know, I remember him and my mom standing by the car, and you know, at that time they were smoking weed, and I remember them there talking and getting high, and it came time that we were gonna have to tell my dad bye. And I ran up and I gave my dad a hug, and I remember saying, "Bye, Daddy." And I just remember the whole transformation of my mother's face. She just looked at me and she said, "You know, you mean to tell me you call him Dad, but you can't even call me Mother? You can't call me Mom?" And I remember her backhanding me so hard. My dad and her got into one of the biggest arguments. I had to go inside, ran inside. After that, it wasn't very long after that my mom, I remember the day that my mom pulled up in a white van. She was sitting in the passenger side, had me, my brother and sister, no belongings, no clothes, no shoes, no anything. Pulled up to to my grandmother's house because my dad lived with my grandmother, and pulled up, and she didn't even look back. She just, with her voice, just told me, "You know, Christina, I want you to get your brother. I want you to get your Thomas, and I want you to get Renee, and I want you to just go knock on the door over there and let your grandma know that y'all are here to stay." And I remember getting my brother and my sister off the van. And something in me didn't want to look back, you know, because of the lack of relationship and bond that I did have with my mother growing up. So I remember walking up to the front door to my grandma's house and knocking. And I just remember the screen door open. I remember the front door opening and looking through the screen, and I could see still to this day the glare off of my grandma's glasses looking down at me and looking around like, you know, how did you get here? You know, where's your mom? And I just remember telling my grandma, you know, she left us and told us for me to tell you that we're here to stay. And I remember walking with my brother and sister, but something inside of me never wanted to look back. You know, I didn't want to look back because it was like, I don't know, something inside of me knew that she wasn't going to come back for us. She was really going to leave us permanently. And that it was like almost like a sense of freedom. But in reality, it was like moving into a more of a prison, but maybe not the mental and the emotional abuse in some sense. But I remember the day that we got dropped off. I remember the day that my aunt came out running out of her room, looking at us, looking through our hair to see if we had head lice, you know, checking us out. You know, we didn't have no clothes. She was mad. She wanted to beat up my mother, you know, and just taking us to the DAV. I still remember the store right there next to the Minyards right there.
How old were you at this?
7 years old at that time.
You were 7?
Yes,
God.
7 years old. And I just remember the pain, you know, the abandonment, you know, because now that's a seed of abandonment, not only rejection, but abandonment at that point, you know, and it's almost, I don't want to say like a knot of acceptance, but it kind of is because they're like, what are you doing here? Why are you here? And then upset, you know, from a child standpoint, you don't see it that way like an adult would.
Who was asking that? Was it
It was my aunt and my grandmother, you know, that because my dad, of course, was at work, and they were asking us, you know, what are you doing here? You know, not in a sense like, you know, we don't want you here, but almost in a sense, kind of like, you know, you're broken already when you're getting dropped off, and those emotions can kind of take over, and you're just like, now it's just another form of rejection. In a way, kind of acceptance, but also at the same time, the bittersweet of rejection of like, why are you here? You know, and it was up until that point that we began to live with my dad. My dad was very young. Now he's a young man. He has 3 children that he has no idea how to raise. He's in the middle of a relationship with a woman that would become my stepmother at this point, my first stepmother. And it just was it was like a downhill after that. It was like constant. We began to live with my dad. And I think because of the load that my dad had now, 3 children, my great-grandparents gave my dad a house as an inheritance, and which was in Brady, Texas. And from there, my dad moved us from Garland. Well, before that, let me back up. He ended up getting married to the lady that he was with when my mom abandoned us with him. And it was for a very short period of time that he was with this woman. He ended up having a baby with her, which didn't last long. But this lady, we went through a different type of abuse. It was almost like a racial abuse because she was Caucasian, my dad's Hispanic. So like little small things I would look back where she would try to like daredevil going over the racetracks and us getting stuck on the tracks in the car and car dying. She tried to take us through a flood one time and we ended up getting stuck in the middle of the flood. And where rescue people would have to come in and with a big old, tower to pull our car out of there. And it almost makes you think like, man, were these like intentional? Like, did she do this because maybe she was young and now she has this big old load and we're in the, it was always when we were with her. But when we would go like to her family's house, we weren't allowed to go inside. We would have to stay outside. Or during the daytime when my dad would be at work, we would get up, eat, and we'd have to stay outside all day. And we were not allowed in the house. We're not to come in. And we would just stay outside all day. We'd find something to get into. We would, entertain ourselves. And it was always right before my dad would get home that we would come in, take a shower, get ready to eat. And then by then my dad's there. He doesn't know that we've been out all day sitting outside. And then, we'd go prepare to go to bed. But after he divorced from her, he ended up moving us to Brady, Texas. I think at this point my grandparents were like, you need to get out of here. You need a fresh start. So he sent us to Brady with my dad. And it seemed to get worse because my dad was partying and he would just never come home. He would leave us all the time for days, sometimes even weeks, by ourselves. Here I am now, like going on 9 years old, having to take care of a sibling, a brother. My brother I'm 9, he's going on 8, and then my sister's going on like 5 years old at this point. So here I am now, a mother to my brother and my sister.
At 9 years old.
Even younger than that. I mean, all through this journey, I'm taking care of my brother and sister. So now we're living in a city where it's just us. He had cousins there, but that will come into play at some point. But this point right here, he would leave us all the time, like literally defenseless, like with no food. I mean, like literally, I'm not over exaggerating when I say no food, like no food. When I say no food, you go open the refrigerator and there's just a stick of butter and maybe some bread, and we would eat bread, bread with butter or sometimes bread with ketchup. And I don't know how I found out, but I think there was just always an instinct in me to have to survive, And I remember there's a small helping hands that was down the street from where we lived at that I would go in there and I would help these little old ladies, these 2 little old ladies. And I would go in there and clean and fold clothes that they had donated. I didn't know it was a donation place. I was just going in there to help them clean up, do whatever I could, and they would give me donated food. So with that food, I would feed my brother and my sister, and a lot of the people from back in the day remember the government cheese, and we'd be all happy with the big block of cheese and the silver cans of the food and the meat. But sometimes, we wouldn't have like gas, or electricity. So we would have to go outside, and I don't know how, like I said, it's only the mercy and grace of God. I would dig up a barbecue pit, and I would heat up the cans on there. I would open up the cans and we would eat straight out of the can. And even then, I believe that God looked out for us because my great-grandparents, through the whole property, we had pear trees, plum trees, peach trees. We had a lot of pecan trees, so we ate off the fruit, literally the fruit of that land. We ate off, that's what we would eat a lot of times, the sour apples, pomegranates. And then, I don't know how I knew, but I would climb the trees and pick all the pecans, and we would walk a few miles to downtown Brady and go sell them. And I would, of course, get an exchange cash money and go across the street to the Piggly Wiggly and go buy groceries, peanut butter, bread, things that were sustainable for us during, for as a kid, Yeah. And I was always just looking, for us to be able to eat. But I think because my dad, people always knew that my dad was never home. One of his relatives would always come and pick me up, very intoxicated.
I don't want to stop you. I just want you to fix your hair.
Yeah, my hair.
Yeah, it's sticking up. I don't want you to look crazy. But go ahead.
But you know what? I don't care. I look crazy for Jesus, amen. Because when I was out there, I didn't care how I looked, amen. Okay. You can be in them clubs and you don't even care. You're walking with one shoe on, your hair's all over the place. How much more for God, right? But I remember, my dad's cousin would pick me up a lot of times, and he was an older gentleman. Well, he's about the same age as my dad. And I remember he would always come, and I just smell that smell of alcohol on him. and he would make me get in the truck, and we would go down to the end of this street to where these sand dunes were, and he would basically try to touch me. He would touch on me, and he would just tell me how I was, he would just tell me all the time, Christina, do you know what a whore is? And I was like, I'm like 9 years old. I'm like thinking like, no. And he was like, well, that's what you are. And that's what you're always going to be. You're like your mother. You're nothing but a whore. And that's what you're always going to. And he just constantly he always had to reiterate that to me, And I think that a lot of my dad's family didn't really like my mom because, like I told you, she was caught up in that lifestyle. But I look back and I know that it was nothing but the enemy himself to try to derail me from the purpose and the plan that God had, to break me so hard where I would never reach that place that God had for me. And I remember just being so broken inside, so shattered, like in fear almost. And I just never wanted to go around that particular family. Mm-hmm. And I just remember one night, like I said, my dad would leave. I remember this day very clearly. I remember coming home from school. For some reason that day, I just didn't feel good. And I remember walking in the house. We roamed the streets all the time because my dad didn't really too much care to where we were at. I remember coming home. I remember seeing my dad on the bed, blow drying his hair, and he was getting ready to go out. I remember telling him that I don't feel good. I remember him having a sack with those fried burritos in it and said, hey, I bought something to eat if you want to get one. And I'm just like, no, I don't feel good. I'm going to lay on the couch. And I remember seeing my brother just jumping around on the bed behind him, just certain things that now I look back, they just stuck out to me, right? They just so etched in my mind. And I just remember all of a sudden I went and I laid in the living room, and we had like a water cooler. I don't know if you remember those air conditions that were the window units.
Oh, yeah.
That you put the water in there. Yeah. If they could bring those back, that would be awesome. But that was what we had. And I just remember waking up to this man over me, ripping my clothes off. At 9 years old, I had got violated by the neighbor. The neighbor had broken into the house and me. And once he had me and I was able to fight him off towards the end, he ran out the front door. And when he ran out the front door, one of his cousins was sitting in the car. And these are like grown men, His cousin's sitting in the car with the car running. I remember as I jumped up from the couch to get, try to clothe myself, I remember seeing the car, the door wide open. This man me with the door wide open, and I just remember seeing this car, this white long car with the maroon top, and the car running, the lights on. And I remember shutting the door, getting we had this shotgun. I remember getting the shotgun out. Wait, my brother and sister, I'm screaming, I'm crying. My brother and sisters, we don't know what to do. I'm trying to absorb just, everything, take in everything that just happened, fearing for my brother and my sister. I'm looking around, and I will never forget, till this day, I still don't buy that game, the operations game. But he used my brother's game to open the window to get in through one of the side windows. And I remember locking every window. I came running in. I just sat by the front, because I wanted to just hold the gauge towards the door. And I remember this man, it seemed like eternity. This man just kept walking up and down our front porch. It was wooden, and you could just hear every step. And I was like, you need to leave. My dad is coming back. And this one was now the other cousin wanting to come in. Your dad told me to meet him here. And I said, no, he didn't. No, he didn't. You need to leave or I'm going to shoot through this front door. And I just remember he wouldn't leave. I remember hearing him jump off the patio, towards where the water cooler was. And I could hear every step on that ground, that dirt. I could hear the sound of his boots hitting every single step, looking. And really, in reality, what he was doing was looking for one of the other windows
to try to
get in. And I just remember just sitting there and just waiting. And finally, after a good minute, I guess he was able to see that I really had a shotgun in my hand facing towards the front door. And if he came in, most likely I was going to shoot him. And I really believed that I would. And at this point, we're waiting. My dad comes home later that evening. And as he comes home, I have a hard time opening the door for my dad because I'm thinking maybe this is an impersonator, because now I'm in shock at this point. Now I'm traumatized. Now I can't even differentiate the voice of my dad from the voice of this man. until my dad begins to threaten that he's going to beat the crap out of me. And then when I start hearing that, I knew it was my dad.
Yeah.
I knew,
Yeah.
you know, his correction, I guess you could say. And I opened the door, and when he saw me, that's when he realized something had happened. And he grabbed that shotgun from me. And I remember him flying up and down the streets looking for this individual that had violated me. I remember having to get my brother and sister, go into the police station, and them doing the kit, taking pictures of my body, you know, taking different, you know, samples out of my nails and just different things that they had to do. And I remember the very next day, because you got to remember this is like way back in the 80s, you know. It's not like a technology of today. And I remember them putting me in an unmarked car and taking me to this place where this gentleman would most likely hang out, and me pointing him out like in a lineup, and they arrested him. And when they arrested him, that's when my dad was like, we're moving back to Garland. We're going to move back. We're not going to come back. We grabbed what little that we had, got in my dad's car, and it was like never brought up again. We didn't talk about it. We just got to my grandma's house. I don't even think that, I don't know if they knew or didn't know, because nobody said nothing about it. Everything was like very quiet, you know, and they just kind of left me alone, just let me to kind of, I guess, like to try to heal in some kind of way, self-medicate. And then I just began to become very angry, you know, because I just felt like if my mom would have never abandoned me, this wouldn't happen. I wouldn't be with my dad. And if my dad was a dad to us, then I would have never got, you know, and if he was there for me, then we would have, you know, he just never took care of us. And it got to a point that my dad began to become very physically abusive, like choke me, beat me up, to a point that he would beat me so bad. And I used to get so involved in anything that was extracurriculum at school, I got involved. Basketball, I was not a good basketball player, but I was on the basketball team. Track, I could run track because I would run. So I got involved in every single thing that I could at school because I didn't want to be at home. You know, the abuse was so horrible that it began to bring like problems with my dad and his brothers. And where they would physically have physical altercations because like one of my uncles could get home and my dad's choking me out and beating the daylights out of me and just wouldn't let up. So then they'd start fist fighting because he would walk in on my dad just beating me up. My dad had a very strong anger problem. And anything that went wrong, I mean, he could come home in a bad mood and just go to town on me, you know. And I just got to a point where I couldn't even dress out at school anymore, you know, because of just the bruises and the whelps on my back, legs, arms, hands.
Let me ask you a question. Were any of your brother or sister, were they getting beat as well? Or was it just because you were the oldest? Or?
I think because I was the oldest, they would get spanked, but not like that. Not like that. I got to a point where I think I couldn't hide it anymore because the last time that my dad beat me so bad, I had just this big old whelp over my face from the belt. And he had hit me so hard that it busted the blood vessels in my face that it created like a whelp, like literally like a scab over my whole face. And at this point, my coach took me into the gym because I would refuse to dress out, of course, because you have to take off your clothes in front of other people. And I just remember her pulling me to the side and said, Christina, you're not going to go out today. And she sent all the girls to go, you know, out. And she said, you're going to come in here. And she took me into the office. And I remember her bringing the CPS lady in. And I said, what are you doing? And she said, you know, they're going to talk to you. And then I just remember them telling me, you know, I need to see, you know, they were looking at my face, took pictures of it. And then she goes, I need you to dress out. I need you to show me your body. I said, I'm not going to show you my body. And I just kept going on. And you're going to have to, I said, I'm not going to show you my body. And
were you in this stage where you were trying to protect your dad, or you was just ashamed of
I think
showing?
ashamed that, you know, as a child, you know, you're like, you don't really know what to do. You know what I mean? You're like, it's not I don't know if it is a form of a protection, but it's like we just never talked about our problems to anybody. And I just did, you know, I was going to get in trouble. You're going to get me in more trouble. And now I'm really going to get beat. You know, I just didn't want to, you know, expose myself. But it came to a point where got to a point where CPS told my dad if he had hit us anymore, they were going to remove us from the home. And it started lighting up a little bit. But at this point, I was already like in a rage where I hated my dad. I hated my family. I hated everybody. I hated my mother, you know, because my dad was also a drug dealer. You know, my dad moved drugs. My aunt was smoking primos. You know, so now here I am in the home. You know, when my dad needed drugs, he would have me transport it. You know, I was the one that would transport the drugs in this big old Louis Vuitton purse. And I would always wonder, why do I have to? And he knew, you know, he would send me with my aunt. He would send me, because it was her boyfriend that was the biggest drug dealer. He would send me with her to go get bring the drugs back, because he would sell it, he was selling. And I would always ask, why do I have to carry the bag? Why do I have to carry this big old ugly bag? Because I'm a kid. I'm like, why do I don't want to be this big old purse.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? I'm
Yeah.
by this point, I'm like 10 years old. What do I want with this big old purse? And why do I got to carry it? And I will never forget the response of my aunt. I remember we were coming down Garland Road. And then I remember I just kept looking at that bag, and I looked at her and I said, why do I got to carry this bag? And she just looked at me and she said, because it's easier to get you out of juvenile than it is to get me out of jail. And I just remember looking at her and I said, well, why do I got to say that it's mine if it's not mine? She said, I just told you, it's easier to get you out of juvenile than it is to get me out of jail. And you're just going to have to say that it's yours. And I mean, it would have weed. It would have cocaine in there. I would go to school, come home. She was real addicted, God rest her soul, because she's not here anymore. But she was real addicted to, like, basically what you could say crack. Because that's what she was doing, cooking crack, putting it on weed, smoking Primos back in the day, freebasing. And she would get so tweaked out that she would shake. So sometimes I'd come home from school, be watching, cartoons, and all of a sudden I just knew that there's that awkward silence. And my brother and sister knew. We just never said anything. And she would say, to tell me to come to the back. And she showed me how to make the crack for her. So it would be my hands cooking the crack for her. And she would be guiding me through each step, so that way when I got done cooking it for her, okay, thank you, you can go back to your cartoons. And that was basically the environment. I was in a very dysfunctional family. One of my uncles was involved was in and out of prison. A lot of my families were caught up in the prison lifestyle, prison gang banging, and different prison gangs, and it was just a lot of like organized crime. I guess you could say it is organized crime. But I was like introduced to that life at a very young age. And to me, it was like normal. I'm thinking like, I guess everybody's house is like this, Everybody's house at this point is like this. And I just remember my grandmother always tried to, I want to say that she always tried to protect me, even though she knew everything.
This is your dad's mom?
Yes, my dad's mom.
Okay.
And she would always tell me, you have to take care of your brother and your sister, no matter what. And I just felt like there was so much pressure on me as a child to have to take care of these kids, have to transport drugs for my dad, have to cook crack for my aunt, have to be a part of this organized robbery scheme they had going on, and be making these phone calls for them in the middle of the night so that they can get in, because they didn't have caller ID and all that. You just call and make sure nobody's home. And I just got tired. Where I began to live it out in a very promiscuous lifestyle in junior high, where I got to a point that I hated what I saw in the mirror, to a point that I would run away all the time. I never wanted to be at home because of the abuse, just everything. And I remember one day just hearing this voice telling me, why do you want to live? Nobody wants you anymore. Don't you see how much they hate you? Why do you want to be here? You're better dead. At least if you die, you don't have to live this, and you don't have to worry about nobody.
This is in junior high, you're telling yourself this?
Yes.
Really?
Yes, sir. I was in 7th grade when I tried to commit suicide. Actually, 6th grade. Almost going into the 7th grade. I was probably like right at the 7th grade, because I remember 7th grade, I ended up finishing out junior high at another school because of that. So I kept hearing this voice telling me, you should just kill yourself. It'd be better off without you here. They don't love you anyways. And it seemed like those voices just kept getting louder and louder and louder and louder. And I ended up I had ran away at this point. And I was at one of these friends' house that was letting me stay there. And they had loved ones that were on all these different medications, psych meds, I don't even know what kind of medications. I just remember I just went and took every single one of them out of their medicine cabinet and just put them in this big old bowl. And I'd probably say it probably made had to be like 200-300 pills, different pills in there. And I remember I just drank every single one of them. And the more I drank them, I mean, I just like handfuls, taking them and just drinking till I ingested every single one of them. And I remember just laying down on this bed. I wrote a note and just said, I'm tired. I don't want to be here anymore. You know, and once I laid down, that was it. I don't remember the rest. The rest I remember waking up in this hospital and they're pumping my stomach out at this point. And once they were able to pump the majority of the medications out of my stomach, because they didn't know how long I had been there, what had happened was I actually became unconscious due to the medications, you know, that I had to, the multiple medications that I had taken. And when I came to finally, I remember my dad walking in and just seeing him. And I was like, why did you let me live? You know, I hate my life. I'm going to myself until I die. You're never going to stop me from myself. I don't want to be here. I hate my life. I hate you. I don't know why you come here acting like you care. I don't want to be here anymore. I hate being here in this world. I hate it. And I just remember the nurse telling my dad, giving my dad this pamphlet and this package and telling him that either you can have her committed to somewhere and get some help, you know, because now she's vocally said that she's going to take her own life. You know, she's going to do something to herself, or we will have to do it for you because she's vocally said it here in front of us. And and you know, and it's the law that we have to take it into our hands. Well, then my dad, we got wind of this place that was United Way, and they ended up taking me into this place. It was called the Promise House in Plano. And I remember going in there, and every single teenager that was in there had been teenagers that had tried to commit suicide at some point. Every single one of them. I mean, we all had came from the same life, the same brokenness, same dysfunction, you know, and different people tried in different ways, but it was like there, at least I finally found a place that I felt like I fit in.
Yeah.
You know, like somebody could identify with the pain that I had experienced, that they too, maybe in a different way, had experienced, but we had one thing in common, was that we hated life. We hated life together, and we hated life. We didn't want to live. And actually, some have left there, sometimes on a visit, and didn't come back. You know, and it was like, I believe that God was trying to line me up for help, but even some of the individuals that worked there would bring drugs and smoke with us and touch on us.
Really?
You know, so it was like, it was everywhere. I was like, these are the people that are supposed to help us. You know, but here we have this man that works here that he always seemed to select me to go with him in his little two-seater, you know, 280, and this other girl that we would bring along, and he would get us high, and he would always make me sit in the middle because it was a standard, and he would always be putting his hand on my leg. So there was always some kind of abuse somewhere. So I was like, you know, what good is it? You know, what good? There's even in here, there's still abuse. You know, and when I got out of there, my time there had expired. I'd been there almost a year, and then they had told my dad, well, we recommend that you put her in the Buckner Children's Home, which is an orphanage in Pleasant Grove, on Buckner and Samuel. And actually, the only dorm that's still there, Crouch One, as soon as you drive onto the property, they've remodeled the whole place, but the only dorm that's still there was the dorm that I was in. And that was the Crouch One dorm when you roll into the property. And I was there. We went to public school. And as we were there in public school, John B. Hood, you know, I began to get caught up in the gang lifestyle and gang violence.
How old are you at this time?
Like 13 years old.
13 now?
13 going on 14.
Okay.
And I only remember that because once I escaped from there, because I didn't stay there, I found a way to get out, you know, because my life, I was like so broken, so dysfunctional. I did not want to be there. You know, I didn't want to be in this place where I didn't know nobody, you know, because I was abandoned again, you know, now by my dad. You know, my mom abandoned me the first time. Now my dad's abandoned me to this orphanage place.
He actually took you there?
Yes, and signed over his rights to the state of Texas. And now I'm property of the state of Texas in this orphanage. And I said, I'm not going to stay here. I found somewhere to stay, and I escaped from there, and I never looked back. And the reason why I say know my age, because during that time you had to be at least 15 years old to work, right? And I remember being in one of my friends in school, you know, because you had the typewriters back then. And I remember asking her, you know, do you have a birth certificate so that way we can make a copy and then I could type over it and then we can make another copy. and then that way I can get a job. And I remember my first job was Luby's right there on Jim Miller and 30. I was not going to stay, I did not want to stay stuck, and it just began to accelerate. Even though I thought I was advancing, really in reality, I was hurting myself, because I was like I was childless. I mean, I was an orphan, like bouncing from place to place, and in that, I remember staying at one of my friend's house. Can I steal one of those napkins right there?
Yeah.
I remember staying at one of my friend's house, and I just remember I got introduced to this guy that was actually a drug dealer at this point. And I remember him always telling me, one day you're gonna be my girlfriend. And I was like, whatever, this ain't gonna, I'm a kid at this point.
Mm-hmm.
And I ended up getting introduced to my son's father, and it was just an abusive relationship. I'm pregnant with my son. I ended up getting this job at this warehouse, working from 6 at night till 6 in the morning, trying to survive 7 days a week. I worked all the way up until the day before I actually gave birth to my son.
Really?
And when he was always constantly putting his hands on me. And as a broken person, you don't know how to defend yourself because you've always been left defenseless.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember getting introduced to this guy that was a drug dealer. And I was like, you're my ticket out of here. You're my way out. I have to make it work here because with you, at least I have stability. At least with you, I have somewhere to stay. I don't have to be homeless. At least with you, I can have money and I can take care of myself. I just kept thinking, and that's childish. It's a childish way to think. But that was the way of survival for me at that point, right?
Right.
So then I get introduced to the drug dealing lifestyle, and I was down with it. I mean, I am a very loyal person. So anything that I did and do, I'm loyal to it. I'm true. Like they say, I'm true to the game.
Mm-hmm.
And I was very true to the game. I ended up getting caught up in the lifestyle of drinking and getting high and partying and the friendships and the money. And I just remember being introduced. It was like I was constantly introduced to people that were high rollers. And, it was just very dangerous all the time. And it was like always living on the edge. But there was like a part of me that was always on the edge. And I think I would just always push it to the extreme just because of the dysfunction and the hatred that I had on my shoulder. Because it was like I was a ticking time bomb. Everywhere I went, I had a chip on my shoulder. And I didn't care if it was a man, a woman, whoever they were. I had a chip on my shoulder. And if anybody that wanted to take, that wanted to just take it, just dab me some kind of way, that would be it. It would be a reason for me to get out there and just put my hands on you and take every form of hatred that I had towards anybody out on these people. And it wasn't even about them. It was just about the anger and the hurt that I had inside that so many people had did to me, but now I'm going to do it to someone else. Now I'm going to make you feel that hatred and that pain that I feel inside. And now I'm not going to even look back to do it. And I remember that, and being in this lifestyle, the guy that I was with ended up getting introduced to heroin. And when he got introduced to heroin, I was a big weed smoker growing up. So to me, I like the downer. I used to like the downers, to be, mellowed out and be chill and stuff like that. But this guy, for a whole year, he was doing heroin. And I never touched it because I had never been introduced to heroin. I had been doing weed and coke, crack, whatever. But even prior to that, throughout the times of shifting from place to place, there's so many layers that you can't even talk about in just a small segment. There's just so many layers to just the things that I had to deal with and live through in the street, stories, where I was, before I ended up getting over here with the guy that I was with that was a drug dealer, I was living in North Dallas, and it was during the time of crack hitting the city of Dallas. And I remember these Jamaicans kind of took me under their wing. That's why I said when I got introduced to this drug dealer, I was like, this is my way out. This is my ticket, because I would have to be from place to place and survive wherever I was at and give up whatever I had to give up to have somewhere to stay. And I remember staying in this one crack house that these Jamaicans ran that show. They ran that whole property. And I remember them giving me work. They said, you can stay here, but you got work. And it wasn't like a work like you go clock in 9 to 5. No, it's like a work. Here's some dime bags and some 20s and some 50s, and you're gonna go get post up on that stairwell right there, and you're gonna sell my dope, and I'm gonna give you so much out of it. So that was my stay, And I remember being there, and at this point, I'm just trying to make a living, trying to find a way to survive. And I remember I ended up going back to Garland for a night, 2 nights, stay with one of my friends from school because I wanted to go visit her. And I remember coming back the next day, and there was this guy there that used to roll the property, and his name was Juice. And I remember we always clicked really well. You know, he knew I was a youngster. He knew I was a kid. He never crossed the lines as far as like trying to make me feel like I was obligated to give him something. I was the one that sold the dope, so he knew that if he had me as his little road dog or whatever, that he would be able to get anything that he wanted. And I was there, you know, and I would give him cuts and I would give him this or that. But he was always getting high. He always had prostitutes with him, and it didn't bother me any because I was so adjusted to that life, you know, so it was nothing. So we'd bounce from, you know, apartment to apartment. And I remember this particular day, I had just got back to the apartments, and as soon as I walked up the stairwell, he caught up to me and he was like, "Hey man, you got to get me out of here, you know, this and this and that." And I said, "What's going on?" Well, before I could even look up, the Jamaicans are on the other side, the other balcony, and they're calling him out. And all of a sudden, he pulls out a gun, and they start having a shootout, like right in the middle of these apartment complex. And this guy that I'm standing with shoots one of the Jamaicans' nephews in the stomach. And I'm like, "Why would you do that?" Because I was friends with them too, you know.
Yeah.
And the nephew, he was just in visiting that day. And I ran to go help him. I'll never forget. He was bleeding out. His name was Drew. I remember helping him out, trying to just keep him from bleeding. I ran and got the apartment, you know, the lady from the apartments. You know, she came out. She was trying to apply pressure, waiting for the ambulance and the police to get there. And I just remember that those Jamaicans pulled me into this apartment because they, you know, here I am walking with this guy. That guy shoots the nephew. And then the day before, little did I know that that guy was involved in a robbery where he robbed one of the customers. Him and a girl robbed a customer. And that's what he was trying to tell me was that he had just did a robbery. And they had robbed one of the clients. And the Jamaicans were at beef with him. So then they pulled me into this apartment. And I'll never forget these two Jamaicans. And they beat the daylights out of me. They beat me so bad that they literally wanted to kill me. I remember them trying to pluck my eyes out. They literally were trying to they were torturing me in a point to try to get me to confess that I was in on this robbery. And I just kept telling them, you know, "I don't know what you're talking about. I don't know what you're talking." And they just kept beating me until finally they ended up running to another apartment because they needed to get the dope out because now the police is coming up on the property. So I run out. I'm able to make it out. By the grace of God, I make it out and I run as far as I can. I remember calling the Dallas police to come. You know, the lady at the Denny's called the police because I'm literally telling you, my eyes were so bloodied up, you know, and everything. I mean, I was just so beat up. And I remember the police getting there, looking at me, made a report, and literally walked away.
That was it.
Didn't take me to the hospital. Didn't tell me like, "Hey, where do you live at? You look like you're a kid. Let me take you home." Nothing. It was actually an actual customer that told me, you know, "You don't belong here. Where do your parents live? I'm going to take you to where you live at." And I remember him taking me to my grandma's house because it's where my dad lived with his now third wife. And, you know, mind you, I'm already escaped from the orphanage. So then I remember showing up and I was trying to rest. And I remember my dad getting home that day from work. And I remember him kneeing me in my back, kind of like nudging me to wake up. And he said, "What are you doing here?" And I remember him telling me, "You know, you need to get up and you got to get out of here. You can't be here. You know, you chose that life, you're going to have to get out." You know, so now I'm walking away, like thinking, where am I going to go? And that was how I ended up at my friend's house, Brenda's. And I didn't have nowhere to go. I'm like walking, thinking like, where do I go? You know, and I remembered my friend from junior high, when I had escaped from the orphanage, and I went and stayed at her house. And it was there that the guy was telling me, "You're going to be my girlfriend." You know, and I'm thinking, this is my ticket. You know, I'm going to get out of here. And that was how I got introduced to him. And, you know, we partied for a few years. We were partying, living the lifestyle, out doing whatever, you know, everything that lifestyle you think that it's good and you got it like that. And then I just remember somebody introduced him to heroin. And for one whole year, I never tried it. You know, I just would see him. He would be nodded out all the time. And it just would make me so angry because I would see him like, why can't you just get off of that? You know, because he would be sick, throwing up. And I just didn't know the potency of that drug, right? You know, and I remember we were at one of his sister's house, and he ended up being so tweaked out that night. And I remember his brother was also on heroin, and he said, "Hey, you know, go get the, you know, he's got some Hyla in his front pocket, you know, go get it for me. You know, man, I'm really sick." And I said, and you know, he's tweaked out. He's not going to be able to move. You'll be able to go get it out of his pocket and he won't do nothing. So I was like, no, I'm not going to go get it. And he's like, man, come on. I said, no, I'm not going to get it. The only way that I'm going to get it is if you do me a shot. I want to try and see what it is. And I remember him telling me, no, I can't do that. And I said, okay, well, then I'm not going to go get it. And I remember him coming back and saying, okay, go get it. I'll give you 10 units. And I said, all right. So I walked in there. He was so tweaked out. I walked in there and took that stuff out of his pocket. Little did I know that it was going to introduce me to a chapter in my life that I would never forget.
Well, yeah, I want to, let's back up. I'm sorry. Because I want to, because here's my thought about drugs, right? I've seen other people do drugs. I've seen the effects on drugs. I've seen, the aftermath of drugs. And so that's what always made me kind of stay away and not even try anything. What made you seeing, how the boyfriend was and how he was nodding off? What made you at that point want to actually try it?
I don't know. Honestly, I really couldn't tell you. I just wanted to know, what was it that he couldn't walk away from? What was it about this drug that you just can't walk away from? Because see, I had walked away from a lot of things. So what is it that to me, because I thought man, you're just weak. You won't do it. You're just being weak. You can't do it, but I bet you I can. And here I go. I told the brother, well, he ends up shooting me up with the 10 units, right? And all it took was one time. I watched him shoot me up in my arm. I watched him how he did it. And that was it. After that one time, I was like, no, I got this. You ain't got to do it. I can do my own self. And then after that, I liked the rush that I felt, because like they say, you're chasing that dragon, but you're only going to get that dragon one time.
What does that feeling feel like for those who
don't never done heroin?
Yeah.
Well, when you inject it, it's like this feeling that, well, first of all, you get this really nasty taste. I don't know what people want that taste for, but you get this really nasty taste in the back of your throat, right? Because it's hitting your bloodstream, And then all of a sudden, it just feels like an elevator. It just starts from the top of your head, and it just slowly works its way all the way down to your feet.
Is it like a tingling feeling?
No, it's just like this.
Hot feeling?
Yeah, like a hot sensation. From the top of your head, it just goes all the way down, and you just feel like this looseness, you just feel like so relaxed. And then when I tried it, like I said, I was a downer person because I like to stay mellow and get high. So now at this point, I'm like, now I really done got introduced to something that I ain't got to wait to get high, and I can just feel it instantly, And once I got introduced to that, that was it. We started getting on this bandwagon of now it's not only him doing heroin, now it's me and him doing heroin. So at this point, now it's an addiction. Well, during this time, they were busting a lot of the drugs that were coming across the border, coming across the ships. And during the early 90s, mid 90s, 94, 95, a lot of the ships were getting hit from Cuba. So now the drugs were becoming scarce here on the street, cocaine and stuff like that, which was what we dealt. And it was becoming so rare, the prices were so high, the drugs were so stepped on. And it was like heroin was almost like a form of escape, but now the drugs are getting scarce, so we can't really supply the financial obligation that it takes to keep staying high. So now at this point, I'm thinking well, the only way that I can do this to get high is, at this point, you really don't even care about your partner. You done lost all, you're not even, that drug is your partner, that heroin is your partner. And I remember just telling him the only way that I can make money is I can go work in this strip club. And, I think he kind of thought about it for a minute and stuff. And he just kind of looked at me and he just, well, okay. And that was all it took, because all he thought about was now we're going to have money, and it didn't bother him. I remember he didn't go with me. I went by myself. I walked into this strip club. It was a fair right there on Webb Chapel on Northwest Highway. I walked in there. Never forget that little white guy. His name was Terry. Walked up to him, and and he's all pimping with a little white suit on. And here I walk in there, and he does the interview with me. Looks me up and down, has me fill out the application and stuff. And I actually started out as a waitress, but then one night he caught me on a buzz, and I just kept looking at the dancers because the atmosphere has become normal, right? It's normalized, this atmosphere. But I'm making money, even as a waitress. I'm making good money because you're conversating, you're getting money. You're on a different hustle, and now I can stay high. I can provide for my drugs.
You still getting high and still? Okay.
And then at this point, I just remember that little white guy, he just tells me, no offense to the Caucasians, but he tells me, you can make a lot of money up there. And that was all it took. And I said, well, what do I got to do? He just said, just go to the house, mom. Tell her to give you something to wear. And see, and that's how the devil works. He always will put you in a place when you're in a vulnerable position and put the right people in place to bring you to a place, you know, to bring you down to a place, you know, to take you down a little bit further. And it was like the enemy always, like God always has people in position, but that devil always has people in position too. So now I'm standing there and I'm looking at this stage, and he's like looking at me, and and he's like right there whispering in my ear. And I just remember, okay, walking up the stairway behind the DJ to go up to the house mom and tell her that I needed something to put on, because back then they actually wore clothes when you came out on the stage. And remember telling her that, that I was going to start dancing. And then I started seeing the more money come in. And then from there, the addiction just grows more and more because it never stays little. It continues to grow. And anything that we do that's destruction, it starts out as one decision, small step. And in that, it just becomes bigger and bigger and bigger. And at this point, now I'm full-blown heroin addict. I'm stripping for the for the money. And then that still don't become enough. Now we become homeless. Now we're living from place to place, hotel to hotel. Now we're living on the streets. We're living homeless. And I just felt like there's got to still be a way to get money. So now I start prostituting on the street. So now I'm jumping in and out of cars. So now I'm jumping into, the next ride, going to this motel, turn a trick, get my money and going about my business, right? Just so that I can continue to stay high. But then that becomes a point where, like, I'm getting tired of this. There's got to be a better way to make some faster money. So then, like I said, the enemy had another man in place, and this other guy, he introduced us to this other guy that was in the same position that we are in. He says, I know how we can get money. So then he breaks out these big old shotguns. He says, we can go rob these trap houses. So now at this point, I'm game. I'm like, let's do it. Let's do it.
Because it doesn't even become about the danger at that point.
No,
You just
I mean, it's not funny.
I know, but I'm just, because I want to put everybody in context. Like, when you in this lifestyle.
You're blind.
Yeah.
You're literally blind. And I tell people, because they're like, you weren't worried about getting killed. I said, man, I was living for the moment. And it's not even so much that, like, enjoying the moment. You're literally living for, I didn't even plan for the next day. I didn't even know if I was going to make it to the next day, and then now here I am with this group, with the guy that I'm with and this other guy. And we're doing kick doors on trap houses at gunpoint, taking all their drugs, tying them up, never shot anybody by the grace of God. I thank God for that, because I don't think that I would be able to hold that on my conscience. I've never been shot, praise God, but I could have been killed in any of those situations, or even killed someone else, not even being in my right mind, not even being able to think clear, because you're not thinking clear. Whether people believe it or not, we are in a spiritual battle. We are spiritual entities living in a spiritual realm. And these demons, these demonic realms had control of my lifestyle, had control of my thinking, had control of my decision making, because now they're fully engulfed in my body. They're like making my every move for me. And I mean, it was just so many things that I've saw, my eyes have seen in that, lifestyle, the way that people got drugs, the way people acted when they were on drugs, the way that people shot up dope. I've seen every piece that there is, and I just remember the last point where it was just so overwhelming. We were just so addicted at this point that we ended up in this high-speed chase after we did this robbery. And I just remember just looking back and just seeing all those cop cars, seeing the streets blocked off, hearing the helicopter, and just thinking, I got to get out of here. We're going to get killed. They're going to get us. They're they weren't like the was back like today. They just shoot you. They're here back then. They would chase you down, at least run after you.
Yeah.
And I just remember running. I just said, I'm bailing. And as soon as we got to a point where we could stop, I just remember jumping and running as fast as I could. And of course I didn't make it. I remember catching the case, getting caught up, going. And the only reason I know my weight during this time is because I had so many open gashes on my legs, on my arms. And I'm sitting in the county jail getting booked in because I'm bleeding all over the place. They take me to the infirmary, and there they had to weigh me. It wasn't a digital scale. They actually had the triple beams back then where you had to kind of guess, balance it out.
Yeah.
And I just remember the guard telling the other guard, just put 105. Oh my God, she's between 100 and 105 pounds. What difference does it make? It's not like a few pounds ain't gonna make a difference, just put 105. And I just remember being so sick in there, so sick. I just remember just not knowing what my fate was, not knowing what was gonna be held for me. And I just got so overwhelmed. I remember going to prison and just thinking, I just got to get out of here. I just got to get out of here.
How long did you end up doing?
I was like in there like almost 18 months.
Okay.
And I was thinking like, man, if I just get out of here, I'm going to do right. I'm going to do good. I'm not going to go back. I'm just going to live this life. In prison, people, we have this false sense of reality of what you're going to come home to. Because now you're clean. Now you want to live right. Now you're like in your right frame of thinking. Your mind's not altered by drugs. It's not altered by the environment or the peer pressure. Now you're like actually thinking like, man, my son, because my dad had to get my son during this time when I was incarcerated. And I just remember sitting there thinking like, man, I just want to come out and be a mom. I want to prove to people that I'm not this bad person. I want people to see that I'm really this good person. I'm not who I've lived. I'm not who I was all these years, because people knew me because a lot of people wouldn't invite me because I would get into fights no matter where we went. Like I said, I was just so hurt and broken, and I didn't care. I had a mouth on me and I just didn't care. I would rip, and we'd be at a grocery store and get out there anywhere. But I ended up, you have like this false sense of reality of what you're going to come home to. I remember writing all this list of everything I wanted to do, where I wanted to go. I remember having to parole to this halfway house. I got out, went to this halfway house. And then I just remember from there, I just began to try to do better. But I ended up regressing and still going back to getting high. And
so let me just stop you. When you went to jail, that's how you got clean off the addiction?
Yeah, I didn't get delivered. I just got clean.
Okay.
Because when you get delivered, God takes that taste out of your mouth. But see, we got to surrender. And I don't think that I don't think that I knew how to surrender. I ended up going back to getting high, and I will never forget, there was this guy, to kind of go back before I went to prison. There was a guy that came to the trap house where I was at. And I will never forget that guy. When you're in your addiction, people think that people are your friends. No, they're not. Some of your family that's getting high with you, they're not. Even your family's not even your family. I remember overdosing in this one trap house. I actually went into cardiac arrest, and even my own blood sister left me there to die. Not one of them called 911 for me. I literally did a 20 piece, on 10. People that are getting high know what I'm talking about. I did a point on 10. And in that, I ran that 10. But as soon as I came out of that bathroom, I just remember telling the guy, man, this had a lot of trash in it. And I just remember after that, I woke up actually to my brother giving me CPR. And there was no one around. No one, not one person. My brother had gave me CPR. And he wouldn't leave me there. For like 3 days, I couldn't leave this trap house. Nobody came back either to check if I had even made it or lived. We're in this trap house for like 3 days, and I couldn't even control my pee because my organs had began to shut down. I should have went to the hospital, but I didn't know no better. And like I said, it was the grace of God. And then I remember being at this other trap house that this one guy actually had got saved, and he had went through this recovery program called Victory Outreach. He had went to the Victory Outreach men's home. And he had graduated, and he came back to the very neighborhood of where he used to buy dope and get high. And I remember him knocking on the door, kind of yelling and knocking on the door at the same time. This lady pulls me out, and I literally had just did a shot of heroin. I'm standing in the bathroom, needle in my arm, did a shot of heroin, and this guy comes banging on the door, and he says, hey, he's calling my name, so she's calling me to come out because I'm going to draw heat, right? So I come stand at the door. I'm like, what are you doing here? And he's like, hey, you need to come out. Jesus told me that if I do not come and get you, that you are going to die. And at this point, I had never known the things of God. I had never been introduced to the gospel. I had never got introduced to what it was to serve God or, have any kind of encounter with God. And at this point, this guy tells me, Jesus told me that if I don't come and get you, you're going to die. And I remember telling him, well, who is Jesus? Do I owe him money? You know, because I'm thinking, because at this point, point in time, I'm like, turning tricks and stuff. And I'm thinking like, maybe did I rob somebody and I owe somebody some money? And I just remember the look in his eyes that he looked at me and he just shook his head and he said, "You really don't know, do you?" And I said, "No, I mean, where do I know him from?" And he said, "Girl, Jesus Christ." And at this point, I'm still kind of like not really getting it, right? And he said, "Girl, get in the car. I'm going to take you where they're going to show you who Jesus Christ is. They're going to teach you who Jesus Christ is." And that's when I got introduced to the Victory Outreach Women's Home. And I ended up leaving from there a week later and only to catch the case. That was right before I caught the case. And because I left from there, ended up going back into robberies. And that's how we had caught the case and went to prison. And I remember when I was in prison, I just would sit there and I would go to the church. I was sobering up, getting cleaned up. But I'll never forget that week that I was in that home, that there was like something that I felt when I was there that felt peace. That's something I could feel like. I felt like the sense of freedom, even though I was physically sick. There was still like inside of me, there was like this sense of freedom inside of me that I longed for, that I had finally found. So then when I got when I was in prison, I remember, it's really horrible in there, because everything's by your last name and everybody's, no, people don't call you by your first name, treat you, just another number. And I just remember when they would call church, I would go and I would sit there and, of course I began on the back row, but then everything in the back row was just everybody's meeting, passing notes, trying to hook up, all the things, conversations going on back there. And I finally got to a point where I just started sitting on front row. Where I was like, man, I want to be, every time these people would come, I felt like I was free in the world. I wasn't incarcerated anymore. I was like I had a sense of like being free in the moment, if that makes sense. And I just remember when I got out, I was like, man, I want that freedom. But it was like in me, I wanted the freedom, but I didn't know how to get the outside to line up with what I had going on the inside, because my environment, there wasn't nobody to grab me by the hands and say, "Come on, you need to change this," or "Come on, you need to study this," or "Come on, let me teach you how to build a foundation in prayer. Let me teach you how to be a young lady in the Lord. I was so rough around the edges that even when I came in the church, I would call people out in the church and I would call them out of their name, call them out to the parking lot. I would call them, I was horrible. Thank God for the people that he had in my life during that time, because they showed me mercy. You know what I mean? I'm sure I gave a lot of them a run for their money and some gray hairs on their head, but they still showed me the love of God. They still showed me mercy. They still endured. They didn't allow me to, how can you say, push my weight, so to say. They weren't intimidated to call me out on my nonsense or to call me out on my behavior. And I did good for a season, but then I ended up getting caught up in the same environment, same people. You think you're going to win them over. No, if you're out there and you're serving the Lord and you're new in the Lord, do not go back to the same places, things, and people till you're strong in the Lord and that you know for a fact that you have been delivered. Because I ended up going back to some of the old people that I used to run the streets with, only to go right back to getting high. And
How long after, I guess, once
maybe
you got
about
out?
a year.
About a year?
And then I ended up violating and going back. This time they sent me through a program called Safe P. And I was there. I was waiting in county to pull chain. Once I pulled chain, they sent me to Safe P. And this is like a behavior modification program where they kind of like take away you telling yourself what to do. They're going to make sure you're going to, like they say, you always going to mind somebody. Well, you're going to mind there, or you're going to find yourself in a whole lot of trouble. But that's why I'm saying is in prison, we have systems. I'm big on prison reformation. I go a lot into the prisons. I'm big on prison reformation because I've been on those whites. I've sat in those whites. I've worked the system. I know the lingo of the system. I know what we're supposed to say, when we're supposed to say it, with who we're supposed to say it, and how to still manipulate the system in the system, right? It's a system. So but there's no freedom. It's just a system. You know how to work the works. And that was my problem through the first time. I did the works, but I didn't allow God to work in me. I was just, like I said, just the mechanics. There was no really like transformation from the inside out yet. And I believe that God had to allow me to go through certain things, to position me within myself to understand that he needed to break me down. He needed to allow certain things in my life to break me down And some, I believe that because of my choices, the enemy took hold of that and used it, but God still worked it for his good, you know. And when I went the second time, I sat through the Safe Peace system, and I just remember thinking like, man, here I am again. You know, why am I here? You know, why can't I get the victory? Why can't I be free? Why can't I stop making these decisions? You know, now I'm serving God and I'm still making these decisions and putting myself in these predicaments and situations. Why am I still doing these things? But I remember when I got out, I remember when I was locked up that time, I remember my ex-old man, his girlfriend was the one that actually had my son at this point. She took care of him while I was incarcerated and would bring him to visit me. And I will be forever grateful for her. And I remember that people would ask me, girl, they don't bother you that she's, you know, with your ex-old man? And I said, girl, I ain't worried about that. And I've been there and done that. But you know what? All I care about is that I can see my son. That's the point you missing. I don't care what she got going on. Me and him, that chapter's closed. But the thing is that she's got my son and taking care. She don't have to do that. You know, they had already separated, and here this woman took on a child of somebody, of an ex, you know, and she's being a blessing to me, you know. So, I mean, I had a lot of respect for her. She came and visited me off and on and would bring my son. And I just remember telling myself, I don't want to go back, Lord. Please help me. Help me to change, you know, help me to change. Please help me to change. And for me to say that I got out and changed, I did for a season. But then again, here I go with a repeat cycle. But this time I didn't go back to prison. I ended up going back to getting high. But I knew that I needed to change because I knew if I went back to the streets, that I would, number one, I would probably die and not make it, or that I'd be killed. And at this point, I ended up going back into the Victory Outreach Women's Home. And this time it was for good, because at this time, the enemy had access to my mind. You know, like I was on smoking ice, and I actually began to experience a lot of things in the demonic realm. I was able to see, like, people that we think that they're hallucinating. They're not hallucinating. They're actually seeing in the spiritual realm what we cannot see. You know, our eyes are naked to the spiritual realm because God has protected and shielded our eyes from us being able to really see what's going on around us. That's why sometimes you can feel certain things when you walk in a room, and like, you know, you could feel like the whole shift, and like, you know, you could be sitting here talking, all of a sudden somebody walk in and they can come in like frustrated or angry, and all of a sudden you could just feel that shift, like, man, what just happened? This whole atmosphere done shifted. Well, what it is that demon done walked in the room and he done shifted the atmosphere. So now your spirit is picking that up. See, but the thing is that God has not allowed us to be able to see those things, because even in the Word of God, where Elijah's in the battle, and Elisha's thinking like, we're gonna die, you know, we're surrounded by the enemy. And Elijah goes and prays to the Lord, and he says, you know, Lord, open the eyes of my servant that he may see that there are more for us than there are against us, right? And God opens the eyes of his servant, and he's able to see the host of heaven fighting on his behalf, right? And he begins to see, like, in reality, like, man, angels are fighting our behalf, man, and they're in battle for us. And seeing a lot of things, we don't realize that, you know, throughout our journey. And I really believe, like in the book of, you know, Genesis in 37, where Joseph was thrown into the pit, right? He goes from the pit to prison, from prison to the palace, right? He has this journey, but in the beginning of this journey, he has a vision that God has given him, telling him that, you know, that his brothers are going to bow down to him, that his mom and dad and then brothers are going to bow down to him. But then he ends up having to go through this process of a journey, that he knew that God gave him a vision, and he saw a glimpse of the vision. And now he's walking out these different places in his walk, and he doesn't understand why he's having to walk out those things. Because when God had already gave him this vision, like, how does this line up with what you've told me you got for me? And in those things, in those process, but really in reality, what God was showing him a glimpse of is that I'm going to send you through a process and send you ahead of them, so that when they come to a place of famine and destruction, you're going to be able to be in a position of help to help them, because you've already done walked it out. And see, and during that process, I didn't realize that in my pain. In my pain, I was just so blinded by the pit, you know, of where I was at
the moment.
I didn't understand what was going on in the moment. But see, God knew how to allow certain things to happen in my life, to allow those certain things to draw up, so that it would surface, even if it caused me failure. Because a lot of successful people would tell you, never trust somebody that never had failure, because they will never know what failure feels like. But when you got somebody that knows what failure feels like, and they're successful, then those are the ones that you trust, because now you can judge them by their scars that they've gone through and the failures that they've had to learn from to have the success. So now they have, so to say, that they're seasoned and they got under their belt, so to say, these little, like little
notches on
little notches on their belt, or little stripes on their sleeves. They can prove and say that I've stood the test of time. I've walked it out when it was the hardest. When everybody else walked out, God walked in, and I continued to dust myself off, even when everyone else was expecting me to stay down, that I still had enough tenacity to get up and say, you know what, if I was bold enough to get up and go to every one of them trap houses in the middle of the night, 2, 3, 4 o'clock in the morning, walking them streets by myself, how much more can I get up and still keep going, even when life seems to throw me, or, to knock me down? Or when I'm going through this trial or this trial and it seems like it's overwhelming, and I have to remind myself, well, when you were with me when I was in prison, when I felt like I was alone, you were there. When I felt like everybody abandoned me, God, you walked in. When I felt like I was at my lowest, it was you that helped me overcome. When I was dying in my vomit, when I literally was dying in my vomit from that overdose, it was you that was there, that picked me up by my hand and allowed me to live. And when I went through the victory, I was one of them hard-headed ones, because I had so much baggage, and sometimes we can shun people like, oh, they just got too many problems. Well, help people unpack that baggage. Sometimes people need people to help them unpack that baggage. I know that I was one that I needed help to unpack the baggage. I didn't know how to. People don't come in polished up.
Right.
They have to. They come in need, and they're looking and they're searching, and and we as the church have to be people that we're sensitive to that. Not saying put on silk gloves, because people know how to come in and manipulate. They know how to come in and pull a fast one on you, because I knew how to do the same thing when I came in. But see, we have to use discernment to say, you know what? We can't give up. We have to continue to have hope for them. We have to continue to believe. Now, I'm not saying like bleed and, like kill yourself, in a sense, because people have to make a decision too. You have to have balance. But when I went through this home, I will never, ever, ever, how can you say, despise my process, because it was in that Victory Outreach Women's Home. It's a plug for the Victory Outreach Women's Home. But when I was in that women's home, I don't care what anybody says. I've seen a lot of women come and go, oh, this is just a prison. No, I've been in prison, homegirl. This ain't no prison. Mm-hmm. This ain't nothing. There ain't no bars on that window right there. You could get up and walk out. Whenever you walk out, I don't hear no keys. I don't hear no. I don't hear no. I don't hear nobody saying chow. I don't have no. You got freedom here. But the thing is that we don't like somebody telling us what to do. And see, and when we tell ourselves what to do, that's how we end up in a wreck, because there's always got to be somebody ahead of us that can help instruct us in the way that we never walked in. How am I going to go in a place that's why I kept failing, because I didn't have nobody to help me deal with myself. I was trying to do it on my own strength, going walking down this journey that I've never been. If I send you somewhere that you've never been and you don't know how to get there, this is going to be a delay for you.
Yeah.
And you're going to go through a lot more U-turns than what you need to. Have I tell you, go this way, turn here, turn there. Then you have a little bit more of a better guess, of the final destination of where you're going. And I've always heard that the devil doesn't get upset with you starting. He just don't want you to finish. Yeah. Because he knows that when you finish, that means you've got to your destination. And he hasn't been able to deviate you and distract you enough to keep you from that final destination. But see, we got to take those blinders off. And I thank God that I didn't grow up in the church. I know that's probably horrible to say, but I thank God, because during the time that I was coming up in the church, there was a lot of religious people, from different backgrounds, different denominations. And seemed like that's what it was all about. But it was there in that women's home that God showed me in a very intimate way. He revealed himself to me in a very real way. He revealed himself to me. I began to hear him speak. When I opened the scripture, I began to hear him speak into my heart. And I began to hear him dealing with areas in my life. I would snap on certain things, and he would automatically, I would hear like the voice of the Holy Spirit, like a conviction not a condemnation, because there's a condemnation, but I would have a conviction to say, man, you know what? You shouldn't act like that. And he would bring a memory of what I look like acting it out. Like sometimes somebody be acting it out, and you think you're going to judge, you're going to throw them rocks, and the Lord say, he show you all of a sudden a flashback of your scene shows up in front of your face. And I'm like, man, that's what I look like. God, I don't want to look like that. Help me to change that image. And then I remember one day I was on a fast, and I was so scared because I was coming up on like 9, 10 months. And it's a year program, but I was coming up on the 9, 10 month. And I remember telling the Lord, I'm scared, Lord, because I'm getting close to getting out. And I've made it this far so many times and I failed. What is going to be so different about this time? How do I know that I'm free? I don't want to repeat the same cycles and come back. I might not have another run in me. I knew at this point I didn't have a run in me because prior to me coming to the women's home, I had started smoking ice, and I literally started seeing, it was crazy because I remember being at work, and I remember taking that, I just barely got introduced to ice. And I remember sitting there in the bathroom at my job and taking, doing a line of ice and sitting there waiting for it to go down. And all of a sudden I look up and I see like this set of eyes looking at me. And I'm like, I'm tripping. I like kind of shake myself like, I know I just didn't see those eyes looking at me. I'm thinking like, girl, you are really tripping now. What did you just do? What dope did you just really ingest, right? Mm-hmm. But really what it was now the enemy was no longer hiding. Now he was making himself very visible to me. So now I look up again and it looked almost like a predator. Like the predator, like these, like a Medusa kind of look. Mm-hmm. And I remember him standing there and just like with his arms crossed looking at me and just this laugh, this evil laugh. And he just started laughing at me and he would like taunt me like he knew I could see him now. He knew that my eyes were unveiled and I was able to see him for who he was. And he would like put his face close to me and his face would like stretch and then he would get back. So now he's messing with my mind. Now he's like taunting my mind and I'm thinking like, oh my God. Well, after that, it was like I tried as much as I could not to see them where I went. But it was like now that door was open. And because that door was open, the demonic realm was open and I could see them and hear them and smell them. And they were just so loud and I could see what they were doing. I could see the acts they were performing. I could see the way they whispered in different people's ear and people would act on it. And they would try to lure me in by showing me that I could see in that realm. And it was like almost enticing because they're like trying to pull that, lust out of you for power to be able to see in that realm, right? So, but there was still a part of me that was not willing to fully surrender. And I remember one night my brother was there. We were getting high, and I thought they put the mark of the beast on me. And they kept telling me that they put the mark of the beast on me. And when I looked in the mirror, I remember seeing this emblem on the front of my forehead, and I just felt so like this utter darkness like I had never experienced. And I tried to strangle my brother. I jumped on top of him and tried to strangle him. And he just like jumped up and grabbed me and pulled me off of him. And by the grace of God, I thank God that I didn't really hurt my brother, but I tried to strangle my brother. And I remember he jumped up and he grabbed me and wrestled me off of him. And he said, you know what, I'm calling the police and I'm taking your rights away from you. And I remember at that point trying to make my mind not look to the left or the right because they were everywhere. And I just remember my son telling me, man, Mom, I really need to go call pastor. And I thought he was telling me that because he saw the mark of the beast on my head. Mm-hmm. But he was telling me that because of how far gone I was. Mm. How much indulged in this life that I had allowed myself to be exposed to. And that was what led me to finally surrender myself to the women's home. I remember I thank God. I don't know why God chose me to have certain supernatural experiences. Whether people believe it or not, there's nobody that could take it away from me. I know what I've walked. I know what I've experienced. And I remember for like 3 months, I could not get rid of this demonic realm. I remember seeing a vision of myself, almost like a moving picture on the wall, like a video showing of me, like standing there. And I remember seeing this big old python snake wrapped around my body, and it was squeezing me. And I remember seeing these people that I didn't recognize. There was only one lady that I recognized in that big old crowd. And they all had their hands up and they had their eyes closed. And I really believe that these were people that were praying, interceding for the backslider. Because you don't know in the spiritual realm where your prayers are going. Mm-hmm. When you say, Lord, I pray for that backslider to return to you, Lord, right now, God is going to send that prayer to that backslider that he's going to draw it to. And I really believe that those were the saints that were really, truly, genuinely interceding for a backslider. And I remember seeing these faces, all these multitude of faces, you know, and I just remember them with their eyes closed and they had their hands up. And it was like they were walking by me, but they didn't touch me. They were just walking by and they had their hands up. And different ones that walked by had different authorities, I believe, because as each one walked by, it sent a different vibration into the realm. And that snake, I would see that snake like vibrate. And some of them walked by and that snake would really vibrate. Some would walk by, it would barely vibrate. But nevertheless, they were sending a vibration in that spiritual realm that eventually was going to lead to my freedom. And because of that, I really believe that the prayer of somebody interceding for the prayer of, you know, for the backslider, that I was in a place, in a position that the Lord, one day, I was crying, I was broken, I was like, didn't know what to do. And I, you know, like I said, I had already just tried to do that to my brother, and I felt like I was losing it. Like, man, I'm really going to end up like in a real psychiatric center, and they're really going to take my rights away, and I'm really going to go to hell. Maybe I have the mark of the beast, and maybe I'm really doomed forever. And I just remember that when I was standing there, it felt like somebody just put their fingers inside my ear. And I heard like this really loud voice screaming at me, telling me, go to the women's home. And again, it yelled at me again, go to the women's home. And finally I said, okay, I'll go. And as soon as I said yes, all of a sudden I felt like my ears popped. I could hear all the sound in a different aspect. I felt so, all of a sudden I started feeling like that heroin, started feeling like from the, like that elevator feeling. I started feeling that, but it was washing me this time. Now this feeling wasn't like that heroin. This one was a clean sensation going down my body from the top of my head to the bottom soles of my feet. Now I'm feeling like I'm being washed. Now I'm feeling like, man, everything that I had in my heart, every anger, every hatred, every lie, everything that I ever said about anybody was big. I couldn't even lie. I actually had my ex-sister-in-law come pick me up, and I gave my apartment away. I gave my furniture away. I gave my car away. I said, all I got to do is get to this women's home because, you know, I got to go. I'm ready to serve the Lord. And I remember her telling me, she pulled over. I couldn't stop praying. I was praying in tongues. I remember her pulling into this residential area, left me there for like 2 hours because she said, you're coming clean with God and I can't handle it. You know, and she was a backslider too, but she wasn't in a place of surrenderance though. But I was, you know, and when you're in a place of surrenderance and, you know, God will separate you. And I thank God for that. And it was like for those 2 hours, I was just being washed and cleansed. And now I was like ready. I felt like so exhausted, but yet so refreshed and so tired that by the time I made it to the women's home this time, I was really ready. I was really ready to surrender. People in the church were like doing a 300. They were like, what the heck? This girl ain't nothing like what she was telling me off barely last week. And who is this person? You know, because they could not believe the transformation, like almost like immediate transformation that took place in my life, right? So now I'm like 10 months in. And I'm beginning to become fearful because I'm like, Lord, because you know that devil will always try to bring some kind of fear, like you're getting ready to get out. You know, how you know you're really delivered, because he always gets you to try to question what the work that God is doing in your life. And I remember telling the Lord, you know, God, I'm getting ready to get out. I don't want to go back. Please help me. You know, why do I keep making these same repeat cycles? Why do I keep repeating the same cycle here? And I just remember the Holy Spirit. And that was how I got my ministry, Beauty for Ashes. And it was there. I was reading the Beauty for Ashes book by Joyce Myers during that time, and I was fasting.
What is it called?
Beauty for Ashes.
Beautiful Ashes?
Beauty for Ashes.
Beauty for Ashes.
And the scripture is in Isaiah 60, he said, I will give you beauty for your ashes and joy for your mourning. You know, and in that, I remember I was reading and I was praying one day, and I will never forget, I heard the Holy Spirit tell me, you need to forgive. And I said, forgive? Forgive who? You know, like I've done forgiving all these people that betrayed me, and you know, you thinking that you believe you've already even forgave all your traitors and all that, all the people that we feel betrayed us. Because when you're in a place of brokenness, you know, sometimes it's not always what it seems. You know, sometimes somebody can do something to you, but you're so broken that you don't see the reality that they really didn't mean it that way, but that because we're broken and our perspective of how we receive it is a total different way than what it really was. You know, and that's where a lot of people are walking out there on the streets with that offense and those wounds. And I remember telling the Holy Spirit, saying, God, well, you know, what do you mean forgiveness, Lord? I've already forgave everybody. He said, no, you haven't. He said, you need to forgive your mother. And you need to forgive your dad. And that was one of the hardest ones that I wept for days. I was like, what do you mean forgive my mom and my dad? They abandoned me. This is why I'm here. This is why I've gone through this horrible life, you know. And the Lord began to show me, Christina, you've experienced my goodness. You've experienced my joy, my love, my mercy. You're full of who I am. You know how to love. He said, but what could they give you? They didn't have me. They were pouring from an empty cup. What could they have given you? They had nothing of who I am to give you of what they should have gave you. So how can you hold them hostage to something that they didn't have? And when he showed me that, I just began to weep. And I said, God, I forgive them. I forgive my mom.
Did you ever tell them or talk to your mom and dad about it, or were you able to?
No, I tried to make amends with my mom, and it's a lot to go back to. But my mom, when I pulled chain the first time, it was the first time that I ran into my mom. When I was pulling chain, she was pulling chain. And we actually, that was the very first time that I had seen her after she walked out on me when I was 7 years old. And she tried to walk up to me. During that time, you actually could smoke cigarettes in county jail. And I remember her asking me for a striker because, you already knew when you pull chain, you have cigarettes ready, hidden in a Kotex, hide it so that when you get rolled up to the next floor, you can go smoke. You still be able to smoke, and get ready to pull, get on that bus and get, wherever they're going to ship you to. And I remember her, because they moved me from tank to tank. And I remember the last tank that they moved me to, I seen her and I caught a glimpse of her and I said, there's no way that could be my mom. Because, I was old enough when she left us. And I sat down and I just started smoking my cigarette and I was just like, please don't come up to me. Please don't come up to me. Sure enough, here she comes with some stud walking up to me and, try to get up in my grill and ask me for a light. And I said, you know what? You need to get out of my face. And she was just like, you know who I am? I said, yeah, I know who you are. And at that point, I stand up and the other girl tried to stud up on me. I said, you know what? This ain't even about you. If I was you, I'd just back up because, I'm young. I'm full of violence at this point. And then she says, do you know who I am? I said, yeah, I know who you are. And then the other girl tried to step in. And I started trading words with her. And I said, yeah, why don't you tell them who you are? Tell them how you walked out on us. Tell you how you never came back. Tell them how I saw you sleeping with dad's friend. Tell them how I caught you and you used to lock me in that closet. Tell them how, and I just began to unload all this stuff that I had in my heart so many years. And that other girl just stepped back. She said, whoa, this is y'all's. And I said, exactly. And after that, she goes, you know what? You're dead to me. I said, that's Hayes. You've been dead to me for a long time. And that was the first exchange. And one of the times when I did get saved, when I got out of prison, I was staying with my sister at one point. My mom showed up and I actually put my hands on her and beat her up really bad. And she just told me from that point I was dead to her. And she's never attempted to make contact with me. It's been a lot of years, 20 plus years. But at that point, when the Lord told me that I needed to forgive her, because I already asked for her forgiveness when I got saved. She didn't want it. So at this point, I needed to forgive her for her abandoning, her rejecting, her, the abuse. I needed to forgive her for not being my mom. I needed to forgive her for what I thought she should have been able to give me that was unable to give me. I needed to forgive that idea of who I thought she was supposed to be, and I had to forgive my dad. And even till this day, my dad is still the same person, just without the drugs and the abuse, because now I'm older, he wouldn't be able to put his hands on me like that. But, I know that whether he's remorseful or not remorseful, that's between him and God. But like they say, that unforgiveness holds you in a prison. When you forgive, that you release the prisoner, and the prisoner you release is you, because that unforgiveness will hold you hostage. And it did. It held me hostage for a lot of years. It fueled my reason of why I was getting high. Every time I got high, I used it to stay out there. It was like a hatred that I had in my heart that drove me to be able to do the things that I did, to have an excuse to justify why I was the way I was. And it was that's what the enemy tries to get us to embrace, that false sense of identity. And I remember that when I told the Lord that I forgive them, and the Lord began to break it down to me in a very personal way, I began to just get so broken. And it was after that, it was like a joy came into my heart, almost like an immediate joy. I felt free. I really, really, truly felt free. And I believe that was the thing that God was holding me hostage to, that life, that was still a link to me, that a hidden yoke on my life, that the enemy still had access through that door of unforgiveness. All the other stuff. That's why I couldn't understand, why do I keep repeating this? Because he still had access through that door of unforgiveness. and through one door, he's able to open a door because he's like a invisible being that all these other ones they have passageway through him, through that one opening. And once I was able to forgive my dad and my mom, it was like my walk with God took off to a whole nother level. I began to just, no matter what, people would offend me and I would let it go. It was just like things that people were like, I know she's been delivered and set free, because I did not respond anymore. I should say I didn't react anymore the way that I did before, because I was wounded. Anything that would touch, anything that was similar to that wound that I had, it was like putting salt on a sore, and it would create more pain, more pain. But see, now that wound was like Holy Ghost sealed up. People could touch that thing and it wouldn't bring that same pain anymore. Even though I knew I could see the scar and remember how it got there, but I didn't feel the pain that I had when it occurred to me or happened to me. Now I'm healed. And I remember that once I graduated the women's home, I actually became the women's home director. And it just began to grow after that. I just began to, like, my relationship with God just began to take off. And the enemy is never going to stop. Anytime that we step into the realm that we're going to soldier up and get into the battle and get into the war that God has called us to, it was like all hell broke loose. After 3 months into stepping into the home director role, I ended up getting diagnosed with a very rare heart disease. I began to get physically attacked. I ended up getting diagnosed with this rare heart disease that they told me that would put me at a risk of sudden death. It's a disease called Brugada syndrome, which it deals with the rhythm, the actual heartbeat itself. So sometimes it goes like super fast and sometimes it goes like super slow. It slurs. And I will never forget that the doctor told me, his name was Chuck Lamp. I'll never forget his name. And I remember him telling me, this is a life, you can fall over dead at any time, you need to come in. We're going to have to, he starts giving me all these different things that they're going to have to do. They're going to try this surgery. And if this doesn't work, then they're going to have to proceed to plan B, which is, insertion of a defibrillator with a pacemaker or dual machine and blah, it's telling me all this stuff. And I still couldn't take it in. I was just like, this is overwhelming. But I had already purchased my tickets for this leadership conference, right? And I remember telling him, well, he's like trying to schedule me for the surgery. I said, well, I can't do that. He's like, well, what do you mean you can't do that? And I said, well, because I got to go to a leadership this week. And I remember him telling me, did you just not hear me what I just told you?
You ain't going to make
it. You could fall over dead at any time. And I remember telling him, you know what, I could have fallen over dead before I even got here, but I'm still here. But I need to get to that leadership because I need to go hear from God first before I go into that knife. I need to make sure that my life with him is good and that, that I'm not going in there until I paid for this leadership, paid for my flight, my hotel, my registration, and you're not taking that from me.
Yeah.
And I remember him telling me, well, when do you fly back in? I said, well, I fly back in Saturday night. He goes, well, I need you here Sunday morning at 5 a.m. I said, good. So then I walk out, right? And I go to this retreat. But God is every detail that God does is so beautiful of what he does for us. Literally every detail, like those that his heart is upright towards him, man, he delights in that. He does little things. And I think for me, it just excites me so much because I know the junk that he pulled me out of. When everyone else kicked me to the curb, when everyone else see me as an outcast, when everyone else turned their back on me, when everyone else saw me as low, when everyone else saw me as you're just a prostitute or you're just a drug addict, nobody when I was walking them streets and I was walking up and down them streets as a drug addict, not one church person stopped to tell me, hey, you know what, girl, come here. I want to pray for you. There's hope for you. You don't have to live this life. I've seen you every day. I live in this neighborhood. I'm saved. And and I want to tell you about a man named Jesus that can save you and deliver you and break that addiction over your life. Not one person. They all passed me up like I did not exist. And I remember that was the number one thing that bothered me the most when I was out there homeless and on them drugs, that people would walk by me and drive by me like I didn't exist, like I was nobody. And I think that's why I take it so personal that God is so into the details with me, that he thinks that I'm that special, that he stops for the little small, minute details to show me that how much he loves me, to show me how much I matter to him, to show me how beautiful I am to him as his daughter. And I remember when I went to this retreat, there was a beautiful song that I had heard for the very first time, and it was called "Lord, I Give You My Heart." And here I am getting ready to go in for a heart surgery. So me, it really ministered me in a very special way. So now I'm like, I just wrote down the chorus part of that song. And I said, you know what, God, when I get out of this surgery, if I make it out, Lord, I'm going to look up this song and I want to learn the words and I want to find out who sings it, because it was a very beautiful song, and when I was going into the surgery, I'm there, I'm broken all week long. I'm absorbing everything that's taking place in my life, where I'm at, but I had to it was like I was there, but I was also being edified, like strengthened, like, you got to remember who you are in Christ. Remember that God has prepared you for this battle. You just came out of training of the women's home. You know how to war on your knees. Not on your knees, but now you're warring on your knees. Now you got purpose. Now you can do something great with what your words, instead of tearing people down. Now you can use them words as power, right? So now I go into this surgery, and I'll never forget that I was laying there, and I got there early that morning, and I remember just being ready for the surgery. And I remember my ex-husband at this time, he was sitting in front of me, and my son was there, my ex-husband was there, and I just had such a peace. Here I am fixing to go into a heart surgery, and not one thing moved me. I was just like in la la land. I had just came back from this retreat. I was on fire. I was like, man, I was just so ready. My heart was right before the Lord. And I just remember the nurse came in, and, they was putting the IV on me to get me ready for the anesthesia team to get ready to come in and give me the anesthetics. And my son was on my right side. My ex-husband was sitting in front of me. The lady had put the IV on my left. And I'm looking and I'm talking to them. And then all of a sudden, I remember him studying up, and he literally almost got in my face. And he was like, "Aren't you afraid?" And I looked at him. I said, "What are you talking about? You're supposed to be my support here." And he said, "You're fixing to go in there and they're going to operate on your heart. Are you not afraid?" See, the enemy was trying to use him. But I was so at peace, and I was like, because sometimes people can be around you serving God, but they're not where you are spiritually.
And I think that was him projecting his fear
on me,
on you.
And then when he
was probably scared.
Then he just kept staring at me. He's like, "How can you just lay there so peaceful?" And I'm like, "Because I have peace," And I just remember, it's gonna be okay. If God takes me today, I'm good with that. I had already had my house in order. I had who was gonna get my son. I knew where my son was gonna go. I had, the only thing was my husband would become a widower, but he would find someone else. I had this all played out in my mind. I was at peace with God. I knew that if God came for me, I would go to heaven. I wasn't going to, I just remember just sitting there, and all of a sudden my son, I think it moved my son in a way. So my son then at that point comes up, and he comes around the other side, and he goes to hug me. But all of a sudden I see my son's face turn real pale, and he runs out of the room, and I'm like, "What the heck?" Well, in reality, what happened was when the nurse put the thing down on the side of my bed, she snipped my the what do you call it, the IV. She snipped it, and it was all my blood was bleeding out on the floor. And that's another mercy of God, that my heart didn't explode with the air getting in that tube. It was literally, I was bleeding all over. There was so much blood on the floor. The lady just came running in, threw big old towels down there. She said, "Please, whatever you do, don't look down." Right away, immediately snipped that thing so that, because it could have blew up my heart with the air going in. And that was another miracle of God.
You are a miracle.
We all are a miracle. Yes. If we only knew.
Yes. Yeah.
And I remember at this point, me going in to the surgery. And I remember going in, being wheeled into the surgery. And lo and behold, I get introduced when, all the team is in there getting prepped for the, getting all the anesthesia ready and everything, all the scalpel, all the knives they're going to use and all their utensils. And I remember I looked up and I saw this girl. And when she came around the corner, I said, "Annie Lockett." And she was a girl I used to run track with. Remember I told you that when I was young in the abuse, I was involved in a lot of sports. And she said, "Christina Benavides." Oh my God. So we're all hugging on the thing. The doctors are all looking at us like, okay, we got a surgery to perform here. And I just remember telling her, "Man, if I make it out here, we have to connect. Because we hadn't seen each other since I had tried to commit, right before I tried to commit suicide. That was the last time I saw her. So now at this point I said, we have to connect. And if not, because she had told me she had gave her life to the Lord. And I said, if we don't see each other on this side, I'll see you on the other side. And I said, I know where I'm going. I told her that I was saved, serving God, and we were just rejoicing, right? So she was there as part of the team to witness every single thing that was being done. Well, and me, we don't realize, how long we're in surgery. But as I was laying there, I remember telling the Lord, I could feel like a little bit of the anesthetics taking over. And I remember telling the Lord, if there is any sin in my heart, please bring it to my remembrance. Any unknown sin, any sin by, omission, anything that I'm unaware, bring it to my mind right now so I can repent. I know God has forgiven us of all sins, but I want any unrepented prayer. We have to repent. And I said, Lord, let me have the opportunity to repent. Your word says it's not your will that any man perish, but that we all have eternal life. Please bring it to my remembrance. And if not, if it's your will for me to continue to live, I will live for you the rest of my life, God. I will serve you all the days of my life, Lord. I will give you all that I am, and everything that you tell me to do, I will do it. And I just remember I felt like I was falling asleep. And don't you know that God is so much in the details? All of a sudden, I heard this full mass choir, beautiful choir, singing that song that I heard at the retreat from the very beginning all the way to the end. And it was so beautiful that God would put his angels there to sing for you while you're in the most difficult place in your time. And I remember as I told the Lord that, I felt like I just fell asleep, but really I had been in the surgery for 3.5 hours. And I remember feeling this breath, it's almost like as soon as I got done with the prayer, I felt this wind, like this breath. I knew it was breath. It went in through my left nostril, down, it felt like you see smoke moving in slow motion. I felt it literally moving in slow motion, go in through my left nostril, come down my esophagus, go in my left lung, come up my right lung, come back up my throat. And as soon as that breath hit the very tip of my lips, my spirit that was breathed in me began to worship the Lord, and my eyes opened. I could not hear very well. I felt like I was underwater, but my eyes opened, and I'm looking straight at the surgeon, right in his face, and I could see him literally resuscitating me. I could see him with the pedals on my chest, shocking me. I could see the nurses holding down my arms. I could see the nurses holding down my legs because they're like putting volts of electricity in your body. Your body's doing crazy things. And I remember seeing this lady that looked like me, like when I was in high school. She looked like me from behind. She had my old high school jacket on, and she was standing next to me, which I really believe was the spirit of death, was standing next to my bed and had her hand extended towards my bed. And I remember telling the Lord, why is she here? She has to get away from me. She's going to contaminate me. She needs to get away. And I remember my eyes making a way around the room and seeing the surgeon at the same time, seeing the St. Jude lady with the machine sitting there, seeing the doctors in the tower watching the surgery happen, looking at myself being resuscitated, looking at this spirit standing next to my bed. And I remember hearing this scripture saying, death, oh death, where is your sting? It no longer has a hold on me. And as soon as I heard that, I seen the lady pop her collar and the jacket fell off and she literally just walked away. And all of a sudden, all the sound came back. And I'm looking back again now at the doctor. And I'm guessing at this time now and my heart's beating. I'm back in my body. I'm looking at the doctor and he's just saying, just take a deep breath. And he begins to give the team instructions as far as to start administering this, administer that, and I go back under and I come out in recovery, And I remember I had that experience and I was like, man, God, thank you so much. Thank you so much that you allowed me to have more time here. But the experience that you gave me to experience that nobody can ever take away from me, you allowed me to see those things. There's nothing I don't care if nobody don't believe it. I know what you've shown, what I've seen and what I've got to experience. And only for that, 2 weeks, I was in the hospital maybe a week and a half, maybe 2 weeks. And I was able to go home and right away I had to go back for a follow-up, because they have to make sure that the machine is working. And then when I went in, the lady just kept trying to find, she kept doing things on this computer and it wouldn't pull up, the little thing, EKG looking thing wouldn't pull up. And I remember her saying, just one moment. I was, what's wrong? Just calm down. She's like, really something bad was going on. She doesn't want to get me crazy, want to get me upset. She runs out and gets the doctor and the doctor immediately comes running in and they start she goes, we need to send you to get an an x-ray immediately. So they wheel me upstairs to the x-ray. They get, and I mean, like, they're literally waiting for the x-ray. I come back down, and the doctor takes me in, and he tells me, Christina, he goes, one of the leads has come out. Your heart is very young, and it's very strong, and one, because it's 2 leads, one in the upper chamber, one in the lower chamber. And it said, and it's so strong that the lead has come out. And the way it looks like, it's like a little tripod with this like little metal needle in the middle that it launches into your muscle, so that if it sends a shock, it has like a ground wire, you know? And he said it's dislodged, and it can puncture your heart at any time, and you could bleed to death from the inside. And I just remember telling myself, Lord, did you let me live long enough to just repent, and now you're going to take me, you know? So now I walk out into the hallway. Nobody's there with me. I'm by myself. I'm standing in Parkland Hospital in the basement, you know, and I'm standing there, and there's like these pillars in between the wall, and I'm just kind of like trying to sink into these pillars and hide, because Parkland's so busy, so much crowd everywhere. There's so many people walking. And at this time, I'm just crying, because now fear is trying to overtake me, because I'm like, now I'm going to really die. You let me live long enough, and you're going to let me die now. Now I'm really not, I don't have no peace no more. What happened, Jesus? You know, did I do something wrong? You know, like, man, why am I having to go through this now? And then I will never forget, there was, like, I say it was an angel in this far corner walking, like the same way that the direction of the people that were walking. But I remember I looked up, his skin was so different, it was like a gray color. His skin, I don't know if it was he or she, but his skin color was so gray. And, you know, like those little wooden dolls that have like that stringy hair, right? Mm-hmm. And it had hair like that. And it was like his eyes were looking straight. They didn't look to the left or to the right. They just looked, he was walking, and he had these certain eyes that they just looked straight. And he's like moving, but I don't see no movement, like body movement, walking or nothing. I just see him like sliding or something. And then all of a sudden, I just see him like move through the crowd. Like, I don't know how to explain it. Like, literally, like, no, like weaving through, excuse me, no, nothing. Like, literally just like walked straight through the people and walked straight up to me and just hugged me so tight, and just said, peace be unto you. The Lord is with you. Do not fear. And walked away. And I felt like strengthened, like I had this supernatural strength, and I said, thank you, Lord. And I just walked back into the hospital, to the cath lab, and I said, I'm ready. And they said, you don't want to wait for your son's on? I said, no, I'm ready. You know, I know God is with me. I'm ready. And they immediately took me in, did the second surgery, you know, but see, that devil don't stop. He don't let up. 2 months later, I go into heart failure again. So now I got like this pressure in my chest. I've gotten like a really bad, like this, like water sensation, like a water in my lungs kind of feeling. Mm-hmm. So now I go into the hospital, and I go back into the hospital. They immediately admit me. Well, they end up doing an echo, and they find out that the sac around my heart is now enlarged, that my heart is enlarged, the sac is full of fluid, and they need to go in and they need to drain that fluid. They told me that it was called a periocardial window, which is they go into the sac. Well, they went in through my back. They had to do an emergency operation. We normally have like 2 tablespoons of fluid that's just to lubricate, you know, the sac, you know, that goes around our heart. That makes it, when it flexes, it can, you know, flex with ease, you know, like so that it's not dried up. It's like moisturizes it, right? Mm-hmm. And they said we're only supposed to have 2 tablespoons, but I had almost a pint in there. And they had to operate immediately and through my back. They went in through my back where my ribs were. They punctured my left lung. They went in through my ribs, and they weaved this tube through my ribs and stitched it to my back they created like a hole in the sac and put this tube in there, and it's connected to this machine. And for 9 days, it had to drain that fluid out. So I had that done, and 9 days, you know, after 9 days, they were able to pull it out of my back. It's the most worst pain. Out of all the surgeries, that one was the worst because, you know, it's weaved through your ribs and stitched to your back. So when they take it out, the only way the doctor said, he said, I know it's going to hurt, and I have to apologize in advance. And you are going to cry, and it is going to be very painful. And how many know that sometimes when we go through things in life, God is telling us, I got to take you through this journey, and I got to perform this because I got to take these things that it's going to kill you. If you don't allow me to take these things out of your life, it's going to kill you. But just know that it's for your good. I know it's going to hurt, and I know it's going to be painful, but it's the only way. It's the only way to be able to, I have to be able to bring healing to your body, and this is the only source that I could do it through. And it was like while I was there, he pulled. He says, I'm telling you right now, just brace yourself, hang on to this bed, and it's gonna be. I'm gonna let you know when I'm gonna do it, so that I don't catch you off because I have to tell you. And he goes, and it's gonna be very painful because I have to yank it out, because this type of surgery we can't just like slowly pull it out. And I could do nothing but what can you do?
Just brace yourself.
And that's how sometimes things in life. We know they're so painful, but we have to face them.
Yeah.
No matter what the pain is going to be, we still have to face, even though we may cry afterwards and we may feel that pain afterwards, but we have to face them.
Yeah.
And that's what he did. That was going to bring healing to my body.
Yeah.
And that's what sometimes is going to bring healing to us in our walk, that we have to face those most painful things in our life in order to have the healing and the victory that we need to move forward.
Yeah.
And
I want to say this because we're going to get out of here. I don't want to keep you too long. But I just want to say, Christina, I admire your strength. And I am so sorry you went through everything that you went through. But on the same token, I'm happy that you went through everything that you went through to be able to deliver this message to people.
Yes.
Because believe it or not, there are people going through something similar.
Yes.
And they don't know how to escape it. They don't know how to get out of that. And so by you telling your story, they have at least a roadmap of how to try to get out of that situation. Because sometimes when you get so far deep into that lifestyle, you get lost on how to even get yourself out.
Yeah.
So thank you again for coming to deliver your message and tell your testimony. I'm just so honored and just pleased to just even be in your company. And I just truly admire your strength.
Thank you.
I really do. I really, really, truly do. Do you have a way of, if people want to contact you, how they can reach out to you? Social media or something?
They can look me up on I am on Facebook. It's under Christina Benavidez, Benavidez. You can always message me there. You can message me there directly. I'm actually working on my website right now because I do go, like I said, I go back into a lot of the prisons to go back for those where God has drawn me out of, to the trap houses, the drug houses, and the prisons. And I'm working on my website. It's called Transformation 613, and it's spelled out Transformation, TRANSFORMATION 60, and then the number 60, and then 1 spelled out, and then the number 3.com. Okay. And hopefully by the end of this weekend, I'll have the rest of my website up. And it'll be able to have, like where people, if they want prayer requests, if they want to send a prayer request, you're more than welcome to send a prayer request. You can even send it to my inbox on Christina Benavidez. You can send me your prayer requests. If you need direction and get in rehab, I can help you, point you in the right direction for rehab. If you're coming out of an abusive relationship, you can, I'm all there, and I've told women, if you want to get out of this lifestyle and if you want to get out of this relationship, just let me know. But you have to know that you know that you know that you know that you don't want to go back. And I will help get you out of there. I will get you out of there. I am not intimidated. I am not afraid to go back in there and help pull you out of there, to put you in a position to where you can get to a place where you can heal and God can do the restoration in your life and you can know who God has created you to be.
Okay. Yes.
You're like, yeah, that's a lot of layers.
No, it is. I love it though. Thank you again. Thank you so much, Christina. It is. See, here's where I am with it, right? Like, I love people to tell the story because you never know
who's listening.
Yes, you never know who's listening, who's gonna see this, who this is gonna deliver.
No,
you know what I mean, and so. I love for you to tell your story. Like this is what I built this platform for people like you to come and tell your story.
Amen.
So I appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
I mean? I definitely appreciate it. If you guys need to get in contact with Christina, if you want to invite her out to speak at engagements or come on your show, hit her up on Christina Benavidez on Facebook. or you can email us and we'll get in contact with her. We'll put you guys in contact.
Thank you. Yes.
Yeah. So thank you again, Christina.
Yes, thank you so much for having me on.
Absolutely. Yo, thank y'all for tapping in. This has been the Tap In Podcast. Thank y'all.